I think what I'm always amazed is by our ability to really adapt very quickly. I think we do have that. And I don't like to use the word jugaad because that implies shortcuts. It's actually just learning really fast. Now with the choices available to audiences, that argument about will they come back to theatres or not is over. They are coming back to theatres. But how often are they coming back and which movies are they coming back for is really the question that we need to answer as filmmakers.
Have you always wondered how a film makes money? Are you one of those people in your friends group who's always talking about box office numbers? Or are you curious to know what goes in and around a producer's mind? Who is a producer? Who spends the money? Who makes the money? Budget kitna lagta hai? Profit kitna banta hai? Hi, I'm Vanita Kohli Khandekar and I'm going to take you on this journey beyond the box office. I'll be chatting with producers, studio heads, trade analysts, directors, and even script testers. People who have money and some people who don't. Don't worry, मैं उनसे उनके on-set experiences के बारे में नहीं पूछूंगी. किसने कौन सा prank किया ये भी नहीं पूछूंगी. So stay tuned to Beyond the Box Office. Hi, welcome back to Beyond the Box Office. I have with me today Siddharth Roy Kapoor and we are sitting in his office at Roy Kapoor Films and I'm surrounded by lovely posters here which are films which I've watched over the years. Welcome to Beyond the Box Office, Siddharth.
Thanks for having me here.
I mean, we've spoken when you were at UTV, we've spoken when you were at Disney, but this is a new experience for me, as I'm sure it is for you. You know, you've been part of some of iconic films, some big films, some middling films over the years that you've been in. We wanted to dig into that experience and understand what you have seen of this ecosystem changing and what portion of that has come to Roy Kapoor Films and how you see it. That's the journey I want to take our viewers through today.
Sure, Vanita. It's always been such a pleasure talking to you over the years because I think you bring so much experience and insight into the business of, you know, media and entertainment, which I think we do need. You know, as you said, it's been a really interesting journey. I started out at UTV in 2005. Before that, I was with Star TV in Hong Kong and Dubai. And
KBC, I remember you were the marketing team of KBC.
That's right. Yes. I was in the marketing team of KBC. So saw all that magic happen. You know, when I joined UTV in 2005, it was a really interesting time, I think, in the motion picture business because Ronnie had set up UTV as one of the first corporate studios in the country.
Yes.
The idea really was to be able to, you know, go in there and do work that probably a lot of people were maybe not doing at that point of time because there were traditional styles of filmmaking, there were established relationships, and to come in there and disrupt things. And I'm so glad to have been on that journey with Ronnie and the incredible team that we had there. It was an interesting sort of inflection point also because the multiplex boom had happened in the early 2000s. And, you know, there was a whole generation that never came to the movie theaters because theaters were just not fun to go to anymore. The video boom happened. So people had just stopped I mean, they were watching movies, but they stopped going to the cinemas to watch movies as much, or at least a certain sort of person. And therefore, you had a lot of mass entertainers doing exceptionally well. But in the mid-2000s, what happened is that audience was coming back to the cinemas because multiplexes now gave them that experience. And so interestingly, that informed the content as well.
Yeah.
You could now do your Khosla Ka Ghoslas and Devdis and Wednesdays of the world.
Live, I remember.
Right, and Peoply Lives of the world. And you had audiences coming to watch them theatrically. So from there, then moving into, of course, you know, a different era where big ticket blockbusters and you know, smaller films are also working at the box office. And I guess you're a product of your experiences, right? So of course, here at RKF, you know, one brings, like you said, the big blockbusters one has been involved in, the middling films and to put it, and as you put it so politely, middling, but you've had a lot of films that have not worked as well.
I was going to come. I have a few names on my list.
Thank you so much for including them.
You know, because you brought up multiplexes, you know, I remember one of the conversations you and I had, maybe at the sidelines of Vicky Frames or something, that multiplexes were skewing the whole creative experience. So there was what we call the multiplex film. And that actually sort of reduced the mass film so much that single screen started shutting down. And what we are seeing in the revival in 2023 is that we need both the ecosystems to survive.
Yeah.
The multiplex film, which in our heads is closely the streaming film or the OTT film also. And you need the you need the Jawan and the Pathans and the Jailer and the Salars also.
Yeah.
So, do you see that? How do you see that now? Because the way things have evolved.
No, that's a very interesting insight. And I think that's absolutely true because modes of distribution impact content as well.
Absolutely.
So at that point of time, multiplexes helped you to be able to get people who had gone away from cinemas back to cinemas, and therefore people who are open to more eclectic content than just the mainstream entertainers. Now those people have the advantage of being able to have their streaming platforms, films at their fingertips, films and series at their fingertips. And so therefore they might have become a little more fickle about the kinds of films that they'll come to watch theatrically. For them now the theatrical experience is very important for it to be cinematic. Because otherwise now they've tasted the convenience of sitting at home and watching films. But the mass audience has tended to be a little more loyal to the cinemas.
Yes.
And therefore now you're seeing, like you said, movies like Jawan and Pathan, and you had Gadar 2 and you had Animal. All these films, I mean 4 films in 2023, doing exceptionally well in single screens. They actually helped single screens revive themselves.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's interesting how every era brings with it changes in distribution that then impact content.
But is part of the reason why the multiplex film happened also is because premium television never happened in India.
That's
right?
true.
We didn't have our HBO moment.
Yeah.
We went straight from daily soap operas to streaming.
Yeah.
And multiplexes filled that gap of premium programming at some level.
That's right. They did. And in fact, we got Chris Brancato, who was one of the showrunners of Narcos, down to do a workshop with a few writers a few years ago.
Okay.
And he was obviously really impressed by sort of the talent that we had in the room. This was a workshop he was doing for writing for series television, basically. And he made the same observation. He said, we've developed this over 50 years. We've gone from network television, we've gone to cable television, we've then gone to the HBOs of the world, and then we moved into streaming.
Correct.
And so the concept of a showrunner is really a writer who starts taking on more and more producerial responsibilities over time. And that happens over a period of time as your skills get honed. But you guys, as with most things in India, you've jumped generations.
Yeah.
You've gone straight from general entertainment to creating this really premium quality 8-episode, shows that people who are used to making films or used to creating general entertainment are now suddenly making. And we're calling ourselves showrunners. But that is a process of evolution to get there.
Totally.
But I think what I'm always amazed is by our ability to really adapt very quickly. I think we do have that. And I don't like to use the word jugaad because that implies shortcuts. It's actually just learning really fast. And I've seen that happen with writers and with producers and with directors over the last 5 to 10 years since premium television has started. I think you've seen a sea change in the kind of quality that was there at the start and the kind that you see today. And I think that's just kudos to everyone for having just put in the hard work to do what the US did in 50 years, to do that in less than 10.
Streaming came to India in 2016. No?
Exactly.
So it's whatever, 7
less
years.
Less than 10 years, yeah.
Yeah, less than 10 years. But
yeah.
we picked up speed, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to start with was UTV. I'm not taking the Star experience because from UTV onwards, you've had the mantle of being the head of the company and, all the films, the shows. And then the Disney merger happened and as head of Disney in India for several years then. And you were studio head. So you were studio head for both of them. What are the big things that Siddharth Roy Kapoor has picked up while he did, your filmography at UTV is phenomenal. If I look at it, Heather, People Live, Rang De Basanti, I mean, some of the best films that were being, Kamine, which was a personal favorite. And part of it is also to tell the audience that these were some of the films you were associated with. And then at Disney, of course, Dangal is the thing which comes to mind, but there's Jaga Jasoos and there's a whole lot of other ones. What is the things that Siddharth Roy Kapoor learns there and brings to Roy Kapoor Films, which he sets up in 2017?
I guess there's the tangible and the intangible, right? The tangible is, of course, the skills that you develop, which are very specific, that you've done marketing, you've done distribution.
Correct.
You've done production. You've worked with talent and therefore you know how to structure things within that. You've worked on multiple scripts and therefore there are certain ups and downs in terms of the pitfalls in screenplay, in terms of the way to work with writers, how to work with directors, how to work with actors, how to work with technicians, and lots of lessons that you learn along the way that then become like muscle memory to a certain extent for many people.
That's a nice expression.
So it's,
I didn't think of muscle memory in terms of corporate culture,
It somehow is
it's
a great mix of creativity and commerce, this field. So I think the commerce part is a commerce part and that you learn as you go along. You don't always learn the right lessons. You have to keep learning new lessons as you go. But that's the part that is the more specific part. And I guess the muscle memory is on the creative side and is on the relationship side,
Okay.
where you're able to know better how to work with people, over a period of time, what brings out the best in people, what triggers people into not having a very productive association with you, the things that you can do at certain crucial points to be able to make sure that something has the best chance of success.
Is there a big one you can share from your earlier experience, not or even at RKF?
So I think the points at which a producer really needs to be all in are obviously when the project is being set up on the script level, on the budgeting level, on the casting level, on the setting up of the project, getting the director the right, the right technicians that they need to be able to bring their vision to life, and the casting, making sure that the budget makes sense, making sure that you've picked the right subject. And then, of course, through the shoot process, making sure that you're monitoring budget, you are monitoring creative, but to a certain extent, the producer has to let go at that point and allow the director to go out there and really shoot their vision that you've agreed on. And of course, intervene in that process if there's something that's happening that's quite against what you had agreed in the first place. And then, of course, in the post-production process, that's where you get involved once again, both on the edit as well as in the marketing and distribution.
So orchestrating the whole thing is what I'm hearing. You're saying that orchestrating it is a complex skill, so you learn it to.
It is. I think you have to be like a conductor, where you know which instruments to call upon at which point of time, and which ones to allow to be let alone at a certain point of time. I guess, if you take the example of a film like Rang De Basanti, right? That film was just
Superb
underway when I joined UTV. It was the fourth Bhagat Singh film.
Oh Lord, was that the same year?
Yeah, I mean,
when the Ajay Devgan
a few years before that,
a
few years before that, a whole bunch of Bhagat Singh films that happened. Your entire cast of characters dies at the end.
Yeah.
You've got a whole present past, narrative going on.
Yeah, it was a very different narrative.
So I think what I learned from that is for Ronnie to have had the gumption at that point of time in our scale. UTV was a much smaller company then, and this was a big budget film. It helped that Amir was in the film, of course.
Yeah.
But Rakesh was also coming into it after Ak, so it wasn't like he was on a very strong wicket either. So for Ronnie and him to decide to go ahead and do that, and for Ronnie to have the gumption to say, let's
do it,
in a way, bet the farm on that. At times, those are calls that you have to just take because you just believe in the script so much.
Were you worried? Did you try to pull back?
I just joined the company. So for me, it was a great ride to just be running the marketing for the film. But of course, you get to, there was a sense, of course, in, we had gone above the budget that we greenlit the film at. So obviously, there was a lot of pressure for the film to work because we also at UTV, we wanted to establish ourselves as a studio of reckoning at that point. We were still early in our journey. So I guess my point is about just putting your neck on the line sometimes and taking certain risks, which are calculated risks, but you need to be able to do that because it is a creative business at the end of the day. And you can always play by the numbers, but invariably, if you're not taking any risks, that's sometimes the biggest risk. So that was one thing that I learned with a film like Rang De. I guess a film like Barfi as well, in that sense.
Yeah.
Anurag Basu came to us, I remember, with a free-flowing narrative. It was a 30-page free-flowing narrative. He wanted to make, Ranbir was...
We were still not in bound script days, I think.
No, we were very much in bound script days. He was not in a bound script zone.
Okay.
And Ranbir, who was at the top of his game, was going to be deaf-mute. Priyanka, at the top of her game, was going to be autistic. Ileana was going to be launched. And it was just a narrative, right? But we fell in love with the narrative. We just loved the way he intended to tell. Both of you liked it. Yeah. Well, Ronnie and I, of course, and then the whole team. But it was a leap of faith. But we trusted, Anurag Basu to be able to deliver, and he really did more than did. So those are the calls that you have to take at times where you're just taking that leap of faith and believing in the filmmaker, believing in the material, believing in your own gut instinct in something, and you will go right and you will go wrong. There's no two ways about it. You're never always going to be right.
But so often a film is good. For example, I think I mentioned Jagga Jasoos, or I can mention Agent Vinod, which was Shriram Raghavan's film. Superb film.
So with Jagga Jasoos, I think the idea was to do our own version of Tintin with heart.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it was going to be Disney-esque, it was going to be Tintin-esque, it was going to be, but with a lot of heart, because that is Anurag Basu. And I think he himself will say that it didn't turn out to be exactly what he intended it to be. But, kudos to his vision to want to attempt to do it. I'm sure he's learned a lot from the experience. We learned a lot from the experience, all of us associated with it. But it's a film I'm very, very proud of having made an attempt to tell
Yes.
something in a certain way.
No, it's a lovely film. But the fact is, and this is something Nikhil Advani said, that the studio, when you're part of a studio framework, it protects you from the Friday. But you're not part of a studio framework now. Do you feel somewhat unprotected?
I think the sense of ownership we had at UTV, and that really all goes down to Ronnie again.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sense of ownership he made you feel. You didn't feel you were protected from the Friday at all.
No?
At all.
Okay.
You were emotionally very, very invested.
Okay.
So I have to admit that in my entrepreneurial journey, that's not a change of feeling that I've had. It's not like I feel any different on an RKF Friday as I used to feel on a UTV Friday.
Acha, you didn't feel safer because you were with Disney or
I
you were with UTV?
I didn't, because it was just the way that we were trained and mentored by Ronnie, and the sense of ownership that he gave us on all the decisions that we were taking to make you always feel like, no, it's yours completely. It's you're sinking or swimming with it, and these are creative choices that we've all made, and we've got to feel very much for it. So there was that sense of ownership even then.
But जब आप UTV में थे या जब आप डिज्नी में थे, बिजनेस भी डिफरेंट था. और जब आपने ये सेटअप किया, आई थिंक स्ट्रीमिंग हैड जस्ट कम इन. 2017 is when you set up Roy Kapoor Films. How much has the business changed? If there were 2-3 things which changed, and you were sensitized to those changes, and they were there at RKF right from the beginning.
I think on a macro level, it was consumers having so much more control over their experience.
And on-demand had happened.
And on-demand had happened. So that is one massive change. I mean, we've been brought up, for those of us who've been in media for more than 20 years, we've been brought up on a more programming culture.
Yeah.
Where you program, the viewer has no choice but to passively accept what you've programmed. They can choose to watch or not watch. But those are the two sort of binary choices that they have. They can choose to buy a movie ticket or not buy it. There's sort of programming on television, and they watch it or don't.
Correct.
But I think then with streaming coming in and with YouTube happening, and then of course social media, the plethora of choices now available to the audience, and therefore the inevitability of how compelling your content has to be able to draw them in is something that's even more stark. Because if you don't do that, then now you know that they've got so many other choices to be able to make. So I think that's something we were very cognizant of when we started off, and made sure that we were doing movies and series at the same time. Again, you can then tend to lose focus and say, oh, let's do short form content, and let's do let's get into social media content, etc. But I think it's really important to keep your focus on what you know best. And I think for us, it was long format, premium, quality storytelling, and on the movies front or on the series front. And that's where we sort of decided to keep our focus, because it's very easy to get waylaid with all these shiny new objects out there that you want to also enjoy and experience.
You brought me to RKF. Where is it right now? And, how do you look at it? It's 2017. So we're talking 7 years now. Yeah. Will be 8 by next year. So where is it right now? Are you happy with what? So you've had Cello film.
That's right. Cello show. Yeah.
Cello show. Sorry. Cello film. I was saying Cello show. You had Ye Ballet. Some of the nice films. I'm remembering them. Rocket Boys. You did co-produced with
on the series,
MA.
Yeah.
And
Aranyak.
I keep thinking of it as Arya something, and it's Aranyak.
It's a tricky one.
It's a tricky
title.
One.
It's
a tricky one. But what's the experience? And where do you think the firm is right now?
So I think we're at a really interesting point at this time, where we're working with a very, very interesting range of talent across the board. Some of the films that you mentioned were very, very fulfilling experiences. Cello show, of course, made it to the shortlist at the Academy Awards, which was very,
You've been associated with many of those, by the way.
Yes.
Festival circuit,
I've been lucky
Academy
to,
edge pe jaake aa gayi.
Yeah. I mean, you can always want it to do better. We made it to the shortlist. We were hoping to get nominated, but that didn't happen. But it was the 4th film to ever get to that point.
Yes.
Rocket Boys, of course, the show that we did for Sony Live along with MA. A tremendous amount of appreciation for that, a lot of love for that. Yeah. And we're so proud to have been able to put that together. And then, of course, we had Aranyak. We did that with Ramesh Sippy Entertainment. Again, very, very fulfilling. Broke into the global top 10 for Netflix. One of the first few shows to do that, I think, from India.
It's done. I haven't seen the show, but I know it's done well.
You must
I've
watch
seen
it.
the Netflix engagement figures on that one. Yeah.
And then there was Ye Ballet, which was called out by Reed Hastings as one of those hidden gems when he was asked in a quarterly call.
Yeah.
So these are really fulfilling things to have happened. We had The Sky is Pink with
Yeah, with
you
Priyanka
know,
Bose.
with Priyanka Chopra and Farhan Akhtar.
Yeah.
That
No, sorry, Shonali Bose.
yeah,
Shonali
that's right.
Bose. I'm
Shonali
sorry,
Bose
not
directed
Priyanka
that.
Bose. I mixed up both the names. Yeah.
And that made it to the Toronto Film Festival in the gala section. And then we had Pippa, which was the Diwali release on Amazon,
Okay.
which again got a lot of love. So I think we've been associated with a lot of projects that we were very happy being associated with, and you know, been proud to have been able to put together. We've got Deva now, which is with Z Studios, directed by Roshan Andrew, Shahid Kapoor, Pooja Hegde. That's on the floors right now. That's an action thriller. Very excited about that. That's shooting as we speak. And then we've got a show that we're doing called Matka King, which goes on to Amazon.
Vijay Varma.
Yeah. It starts in June. So Nagraj Manjule, who I've wanted to work with since I saw Sairat and was blown away by it.
Sairat was
was an incredible film.
Yeah, phenomenal.
So been talking to Nagraj ever since then. Yeah, the music.
I'm just using the LA Philharmonic.
Incredible.
Just,
Ajay Atul's score.
Yeah,
fabulous. Yeah. And so glad that Nagraj and us are doing that together. That of course is a fascinating story about the origins of Matka, in the country. So got a lot of interesting things in development as well, which will be going on the floors.
So what is, how happy are you with how RKF is placed right now, and what do you think is missing?
I don't think I'm ever going to be happy with how one is placed, because then that means that you're satisfied with where you are, which I don't tend to be. I think we can do a lot more. I think the sky's the limit in terms of the potential to be able to do a lot more. We'd like to be able to create something out of India that reaches out to the world. I think that's one area where we as the Indian entertainment industry now have the ability, because we've got the platforms to be able to put our work out there. And I think we should take that challenge upon ourselves to really have our own Squid Game or our own Money Heist, our own Parasite that we're able to put out into the world in the next few years. So I'm working really hard on trying to make that happen as well. And of course, trying to make Indian content for our subcontinent and for the diaspora.
I'm doing a book around soft power of Indian cinema, and yesterday I met somebody very senior from Net. I asked the same question on Squid Game. So she said every country wants its Squid Game.
Of course, as they should.
So I find it interesting that has become some sort of benchmark.
Yeah.
But tell me one thing. How do you, your choice of subjects, series, films is not eclectic, but it's quirky, let's say. How do you measure success, failure, and how much has what you learned at UTV or what you learned at Disney, how much is that? Is the measure of success or failure different at RKF than you? I mean, because you were in a corporate structure, this is your own structure. So how does your thinking on success and failure change?
I think that's an interesting question, because it does. It does tend to. At UTV, we were a public company. So there was a certain quarterly expectation of being able to have a certain slate. And therefore, we probably did a lot of things that we were very happy to do. But probably a few things that were slightly opportunistic, because we had to be able to have a quarter-on-quarter progress happen. And therefore, there were probably a few movies in there that we might not have made if we had the luxury of not having to deliver quarterly results. And that tends to be something that you're not thrilled about having to do, but you have to do it. Then, of course, at Disney, it was more, you could be more circumspect, because that was a private company. But again, because the focus was on Disney branded films at that point of time. And I guess at UTV, that had not really been something that was a lens that we were looking at. We were looking at all kinds of content. At Disney, it tended to be something that would fit into the Disney brand. So again, that does limit you to a certain extent with regard to, it needs to be family friendly, it needs to be something kids can watch, etc., etc. Here at RKF, it's pretty much open season on what we can do. As you said, our choices do tend to be something that might be a little out of left field, because that's the stuff that we gravitate towards. But do we want to make a mainstream big ticket blockbuster? Who doesn't want to do that?
Yes, we want.
Right? I guess a film like Dangal, which you mentioned, comes closest to...
I have a Dangal question, but I'll come to
that. Actually comes closest to what would be the holy grail, as far as I'm concerned, with regard to it all coming together. You get your big ticket blockbuster, but you're able to tell a story that you really gravitate towards, because you feel it's so compelling, it has to be told. And it talks about so many things while being incredibly entertaining.
It's a good film. It is the biggest blockbuster in Indian cinema.
Yeah.
In fact, the same year that Disney had Dangal, it also had Mohenjo-daro.
Yeah.
And I always wonder at the contrast of it. What was that year for you? Because I remember interviewing you, because Disney had decided to either shut production of films or they'd gone slow. Because you'd said, no, Vanita, we have to contextualize this. I remember this. I didn't go back to that story, but I remember interviewing you. What was that year like?
It tends to be, things like that tend to happen in the movie business. The rough comes with the smooth. And I think you have to accept creative risk, and that creative choices are never going to be binary. There's complete subjectivity in decision making. And however much you try to distill it down to a science, it's always going to have a lot of art in it. So I'm proud of all the choices we made. Sometimes you go in with the best intentions and they don't turn out to be the way that you would have wanted them to turn out. But yes, of course, it is heartbreaking when something that you believed in probably was not accepted by the audience. And we've had that happen to us many, many times. And so, yeah, there's
Jagga
always...
Jasoos, which I thought was a lovely film.
Yeah.
I remember going with my son to watch it, and it's a beautiful film. And it just didn't take off.
Again,
and now it has like a cult following, by the way.
It does. And those are the things that we do to make ourselves feel better. That there is, yes. But I mean, we stand by everything that we did. I mean, the good part is that we did these ones for all the right reasons, and we've learned lessons from them. I'm sure everyone has, us as producers, the directors, the actors involved with them. And then you try to do better next time. That's
what I wanted to know. What is the lesson? Especially because, I thought 2016 was like a watershed year in that sense. So what was the lesson from that contrast of Dangal and Mohenjo-daro?
Sometimes you push yourself to distill something into lessons when at times there can't really be any straight answers, right? You might still make the same so-called mistake again when it comes to picking a subject that you believe has a lot of resonance, or probably a story that you believe in, that the audience might not really care to enjoy as much as you do. And that risk is always going to be there.
But that's inherent to filmmaking.
Which is inherent to filmmaking. So I guess the way that most producers look at the process is that you tend to try to spread your risk as much as you can by doing multiple things so that the likelihood of a few of those things working more than making up for the ones that don't, that's one. And two is that just looking at it from the commercial angle, you try to de-risk yourself as much as possible on the non-theatrical side of things.
Correct.
So that you're not leaving yourself that open to the vagaries of the theatrical box office. And of course, then if you get an upside there, that's great, but at least you've covered your downside.
How dependent, when you and I used to talk about this, how dependent is the non-theatrical side? Last I looked, theatrical was about 60-65% of all the revenues on an average for all films. How dependent is a producer in this day and age on the non-theatrical side? Is it for break even, or is it to make a profit? Where are we right now on that?
See, what's happened with the bigger ticket films with big stars, with a big scale, etc., is that ironically your non-theatrical can now account for quite a significant percentage of that, because those are the films that are in demand. So when it comes to digital or satellite or music or any of the non-theatrical rights, when someone wants to break the bank and go out there and really make a bid for something, then it's invariably the big ticket blockbusters.
And they have to be a theatrical success for them to command prices on the non-theatrical
No,
side.
you are able to actually de-risk yourself in advance of theatrical because you've got something so saleable.
You mean the star factor, the writer, the director.
Exactly. And so therefore you're able to cover up sometimes as much as 70 to 80% of your cost of production on the non-theatrical side. But at least a bare minimum of 50%. What happens with the smaller films is that those you tend to be a little bit more, though the scale is obviously much smaller because the budget is smaller.
So the risk is less.
But the risk is, so the risk in volume terms is less, but in percentage terms could tend to be more. Because you could tend to be able to de-risk only to the extent of 20-30% of your cost of production on non-theatrical, because those are films that are not in demand. And that is hard to pre-sell those rights. And therefore you're going out on a limb quite a bit on those ones, because those ones tend to have to work at the box office for you to be able to make a profit on them. That's what's happened in the last few years, where in a sense there is a little bit of a polarization with regard to the films that work and the ones that don't. Like in 2023, I just saw a stat recently that said that the top 10 films accounted for 40% of the box office. And 2023 was a banner year, right? It was, I think, one of the biggest years in Indian cinema. We were the top 3 in the world. There was a US, Canada, then there was China, India. And then there was India. But of that entire India pie, the top 10 films accounted for 40% of the box office. So that means that the big got bigger. The middling ones went either here or there. Some landed up on OTT directly, and the smaller ones had it much tougher. And so therefore, I think now with the choices available to audiences, that argument about will they come back to theaters or not is over. They are coming back to theaters. But how often are they coming back, and which movies are they coming back for is really the question that we need to answer as filmmakers.
But, in fact, it was one of my last questions, but because we brought back people coming back to the theaters, Ormax has just released some data. 157 million Indians have walked in. So about 29% higher than 2022.
Yeah.
But
Which is still only 10% of our population.
Exactly. That was my point. And I remember having an animated discussion, and you and I have disagreed on this. I said our per capita screen count and our ticket sales are nowhere close to what it should be for a. I think it was on screen count that you and I disagreed. Right. But what will it take? I mean, the US is 76% if I look at 2019 data, and Europe is roughly 50% of population. If we are such a film, even if you take out children and you take out old people and you take out rural areas, even if you say that 30 or 40% of the population is film going, urban and semi-urban, even then that percentage is so low.
But isn't that a great opportunity? It's a huge opportunity.
Kitne saalon mein opportunity thi yaar?
I know. But you've at least got to 10% of your population. And again, India, of course, and we all know this, you have to look at the addressable economic population, right?
Agreed.
So we can't, we often look at that 1.5 billion and say that many consumers, but we know that's not the case. The addressable population is probably half of that. So you look at 750 million, of that you've reached 150. You've got 600 million more that you can go out to, which I think is a tremendous opportunity, because these are people who we have a burgeoning middle class. We have disposable income that's only growing. Our GDP is growing at a great rate. Our per capita income is growing. These are people who are going to be able to afford it even if they can't today. And therefore, if you bring them into cinemas, you have a huge untapped market there. And I think it's just on us to be able to draw them in.
To do it.
Absolutely. It's interesting as a stat, since you mentioned this, when you look at even the number of Indians who pay for at least one streaming service, that's at a similar number. That's also 157 million.
But to my mind, it is also indicative of income inequality.
Right.
Because you say 650 million smartphones, and they've remained stagnant for 2 years.
Right.
So there is some distress at the bottom end, which is reflecting, but
for
maybe
sure.
not for films.
For sure.
Maybe not for. I really don't.
For sure. So, but even if you take out that percentage of the population that we're saying can't afford a streaming service, even one streaming service to pay for it, and can't afford a movie ticket, because of course we still are, a relatively poor country. But if you look at the addressable population that can,
it's still huge.
Massive untapped market.
Huge. I agree. Headroom for growth is
huge.
But if I flip that around and saying, like, for example, how many people are working on Deva?
Probably around 300 odd people, if not more.
And if you remember, we've had this conversation that the film or the cinema business is always treated like this fluff, glamour doll business, but it's not only about Shah Rukh or Salman or Akshay Kumar, because these are the sort of big stars. But it's about millions of people who are employed by this business and who generate something called soft power for this industry or for this country. I mean, when you go abroad, the first thing any cabbie asks you in most countries is Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan. If you go to Russia, they'll probably say Mithun.
And Raj Kapoor.
The fact is, what will it take? And we are a business about communication. We are sharing stories. Why is our story as a cinema business not being communicated?
I think that's a great question, and one that, again, there are no easy answers for, but I completely agree with you. When you look at Korea and you look at the moment they've had in the last 10 years, where Korean music, Korean food, Korean cinema, Korean, television has gone out, and their soft power has reached out to the world in such an incredible way. They're winning Oscars. K-pop is taken over, music stations around the world. Everyone wants to sample Korean food. K-dramas are something that people are actually learning Korean in order to be able to watch those shows. It hasn't happened by chance. I mean, one way to look at it is great. They had a cultural, renaissance in this one decade, and suddenly, there was a tipping point and it went through, which is it could be partly true, but there's been a concerted effort by their government over the last 20 years to support Korean, culture, to support Korean pop culture. And I think if we're able to look at doing that for India, because all the raw material is readily available. We've got the talent, we've got the stories, we now have the distribution platforms. If our powers that be can actually look at supporting our soft power in a really concerted way, I do think India can have its moment in the next 10 years. And fine, I'll even take out the fact that let's not even look at any government support there. Let's just look at doing it ourselves, because today we have the ability to be able to do that. As long as people are allowed to create content freely, I do think it's bound to happen as far as India is concerned in the next decade.
You've had, on that line of thought, you've had 3 or 4 films which have gone on to win a lot of international recognition. Cello Show or Ye Ballet. what does it take to reach there? For example, on a cello show, or even Sky is Pink, which was, what is it about having a budget which helps the discoverability internationally? What does it take to reach, and is it important to the film's economic success?
See, I don't think you can greenlight a film based on the potential for it to reach out to a global audience, because that's always going to have to be the cherry on the cake, right? So it's got to work for the market that it's aimed towards. But I do think that if you can recognize the potential in a film to be able to go beyond just the South Asian diaspora overseas, again, I'll go back to the case of Dangal, for example, and what happened in China. Again, I can't say that we could have planned for that completely. Of course, we set ourselves up by distributing it well. And of course, we knew that Aamir was a big star there after Three Idiots and PK did as well as they did there. But no one could have imagined it would go on to do $200 million in China. I mean, that was just incredible.
Totally.
But if we had to analyze that a little bit, and we've done some research in China as well at that point of time, I remember, what I think really connected with people was that China is also patriarchy in many ways. Right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, the cultural connectivity was so strong in terms of them being able to appreciate this one wrestler from rural Haryana and being able to empathize with his dilemma of wanting to live out his dreams through his sons, not having any, and giving up on those dreams. And then his daughters making him realize that he can live out his dreams through them was so culturally resonant in a culture that we would never have imagined would be so similar to ours. And I think it's being able to, now, is that something that we recognized? I don't think we can claim credit to having fully known that. We set ourselves up for success and it was a success. But in hindsight, that really was true. And it was able to, resonate in that culture so well. So I think if you're able to identify those themes in your film and be objective about it, don't think that every film that you're making has that potential. And then try to take that out into the world and make sure it gets the distribution that it needs. Then you have the best chance of making it work. But I think you can't start creating something in a theoretical way that you hope will work. You've got to be true to
the story
you want to tell. Like if you look at Parasite, it's talking about Korea. It's talking about a specific socio-economic class there, about the upstairs and the downstairs, which is very culturally specific there.
Correct.
But the theme of an upstairs and downstairs, right? And the haves and the have-nots is something so resonant everywhere.
Totally. If I remember correctly, Dangal was called Let's Wrestle Papa.
That's
in
right.
Chinese, in Mandarin.
Something like that.
Because I remember that. But you're right. Because that's how I remember asking, even yesterday, Monica, I did some conversation with Monica of Netflix, and she said that the way our system works, the story has to work locally. Only then will it get picked up by the system.
Yes.
And it will be displayed to the world. So Kohra did well in India, and therefore it hit the charts on the global top 10,
exactly.
non-English. So some changes which broadcasting forced on cinema, if you remember, and some changes with streaming. I want you to take us through what are the big changes you think streaming has forced on cinema, and how is our ecosystem using it? I mean, is there a film you can share with us where you can talk about the good or the bad changes that streaming may have forced onto the system?
I'm not sure you can say streaming has forced anything onto cinema at this point of time. It's one more avenue for revenue when it comes to a movie, right? Which I think is great. There's an 8-week window between your theatrical release and your release on streaming, which therefore cuts your theatrical window to that much, and which therefore means that people might believe that something's going to be coming onto a streaming platform anyway. Do we really need to go to the cinema to watch it?
Has it been agreed on 8 weeks? Because I find that very flexy. People don't...
I think generally speaking, everyone's sticking to 8 weeks, to an 8-week window. And therefore, you've got to be that much more focused on making sure that you're providing a theatrical experience for someone to not be okay with waiting 8 weeks to watch it on a platform. So I think it's basically, if anything, it's brought more rigor into what constitutes a theatrical experience, and producers having those internal discussions with themselves and with their teams about, am I making this film for theaters? And if I am, it better be something that draws audiences in, because they just can't wait to watch it, and they don't want to wait. They don't want to wait 8 weeks.
Okay. And measures, again, sorry to come back to measures, but measures for
because you're doing both streaming and you're doing films, measures for success on both, how different are they? Because streaming seems a lot like films. It's like making 8 films. Who was telling me that Hira Mandi, somebody said on the set that this is like making 8 films, it's so tough. But how do the measures change in terms of profits or revenues or whatever the measure of success that you would use?
Well, one is of course the commercial measures, which is what's your margin on a film and what is it when you make a streaming show. That's simple. But I think the other measures, of course, when it comes to theatrical, is you have the box office as your report card, right? About whether you've worked or you haven't worked. So that's always very stark and out there in the public domain. And I think our reporting has gotten reasonably accurate now. We're within a 95% accuracy of what your box office actually has been.
Such a journey.
Which I think is a huge change since the past. With streaming, one is, of course, whether you've been able to tap into the cultural zeitgeist of that moment. And that you get that feedback pretty quickly. You get that from social media. You get that from people. You get that from the industry as well as from outside the industry with regard to has a show become water cooler conversation or not? And that's something that that's one measure. The other measure, and platforms have started sharing more information now, is whether it's worked for them. And what their metrics are, because every platform, I'm sure, has their own individual metrics.
Third parties.
I think they've become much more transparent with filmmakers about whether the shows worked or not worked for them. And that helps you.
Margin-wise, how do the streaming was?
It depends. There's a range of margins depending on, the production house, depending on the talent associated with the project and so on. But it's still a model where it's on a commission basis, and therefore the production house tends not to own the IP. It's owned by the platform. Unless you're in a model where you're producing it yourself and then you're syndicating it, which is not very prevalent.
It's not. And what does RKF do? Do you guys?
We work on a commissioned basis.
Okay. One of the things which we discussed earlier in briefly was about how to expand the market. Do you see this, the fact that streaming has allowed domestic crossovers and it's expanding the market? It may be by baby steps, so we've seen some uptick on the number of tickets sold compared to pre-pandemic, and I'm sure it'll go up to some.
Yeah.
Do you think that will also change the economics of the game?
The fact that more tickets are being sold theatrically?
More Indians are watching different cinemas from their own country.
Yeah, for sure.
The domestic crossover.
For sure. That actually happened through COVID. All through COVID, because once people were done watching their own language, then they started watching everyone else's. And I think today, at least from the south to the north, it's definitely happened. No question about it, where Malayalam film directors and actors, Tamil film directors and actors, Telugu film directors and actors, Kannada, are well known by Hindi audiences across the length and breadth of the country.
Manjumal boys?
Yeah.
Going through the roof.
I mean, when you look at Malayalam cinema this year,
superb.
And how incredibly well it's done, that tells you that that's the effect of people getting introduced to this talent through streaming and now going out to cinemas and watching those films.
Because Malayalam films were like the indie films of our, at least in my generation.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to get access to them, and then you saw them now you see them on streaming, and suddenly they've taken off.
It's incredible, and the talent flow, both sides, north to south, south to north. So we're truly functioning more and more like an Indian film industry now, and I think that's a great thing.
What are the shows that you're most excited, shows or films you're most excited about for RKF coming up now? Matka King, it sounds very interesting.
So I've got Deva and Matka King, which are the two, sort of ongoing projects. But there's of course the Anarchy, which we're setting
William
up as.
Dalrymple.
That's right. So we're setting that up as a global project.
Could you describe it a
sure.
little for my?
So the Anarchy is really the story of the East India Company in India, and the years from. The book spans from 1599 all the way to 1803 or so. The entire journey till a certain point of time. And then, of course, William Dalrymple has written various books in different chronologies. But this is basically spanning the first signs of the East India Company coming to the country till the time that they actually were running vast swathes of India. And what we are trying to do is, sort of telling that story through these incredibly delicious characters that he's managed to flesh out so beautifully in the book, from Robert Clive and Warren Hastings to Shah Alam, to the Jagat Seths, who were the money lenders at that point of time, to Sirajuddaula.
Many of them are
Mir
in
Jafar.
CBSE textbooks. That's
Yeah,
how I
yeah.
learnt about them.
These are characters
From
we
my
all
son's textbooks.
read about in in a really dry way in our textbooks. But it's so fascinating how a company, effectively, we talk about corporations today being mini nations.
Huh.
This actually happened many, many years ago, where a corporation had its own private army
Mm.
and ran a subcontinent. And it was a company. It was not the crown.
Mm.
And for a lot of people, that penny hasn't fully dropped. That we're talking about Apple and Microsoft and Google today and saying that they are these mini nations, but you actually
They
literally
are.
had that
They
happen, hundreds of years ago, and we were run by them.
Mm.
So it's really being able to tell that story.
Who's making the series?
Where we'll have some
Putting it
announcements
together.
to make,
Ah,
hopefully later this year.
okay.
But
okay.
we're very excited about that. We've tied up with Whip, which is a production company in the US.
Mm.
They've made Mayor of Easttown and Dickinson
Mm.
shows like that. And they are doing this
Mayor
along
of
with us.
Easttown is the
Mayor of Easttown is a Kate Winslet show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But what does it take for RKF or Siddharth Roy Kapoor to green light? What are the hygiene factors which need to be in place?
I think the first thing is we have to fall in love with the material. We have to really, really respond intuitively, emotionally, in the way that the material is intended to evoke what it is in us. Is it emotion? Is it humor? Is it drama? Is it so whatever it is, that material should speak to you very deeply to start with.
Mhm.
Secondly, of course, the people associated with it, who's intended to be the director, what the cast would look like, what the budget of that would be, what the genre is, and therefore the commercial viability of that. Those are questions that you get into immediately at the next round.
Correct.
But I think the first thing has got to be how compelling that material is for you and how much you feel that story needs to be told.
And then it doesn't resonate, or when it resonates, what does it feel like? I always wonder, because it's a team.
Yeah.
Filmmaking, cinema is a team sport.
Yeah.
It's not
When it resonates, it's the sweetest feeling in the
Sweetest,
world.
obviously.
I mean, it's just everyone's on a high for weeks on end, and then you move on to the next thing. And when it doesn't, you just lick your wounds and have a few,
go back to doing the
have a
next
few
one.
tragic evenings, and then you move on. I mean, that's the best you can do, right?
I
Just-
remember there was a success party or release party for Kamine. And I remember reading that they played Tantanan, I don't know how many times for it.
That's all anyone was dancing to that night.
Superb. I hope Deva does very well.
Thank
I
you.
don't know about Matta King. I'm very curious because I love Vijay Varma's work, but very curious about how that turns out. And
Yeah, no, it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
It's written really, really interestingly well. It's written by Abhay Korane, who wrote the story for Rocket Boys.
Oh,
And
okay.
he's done a great job. He as well as Nagaraj have worked on the script together. So it's going to be very exciting.
Let's see. On that note, thank you so much, Sid, for being on Beyond the Box Office. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.